talk about that.
It's dark down here. It's quite... Hello, my name is Ian J. Cole and welcome to my channel.
Sorry for the delay, we've got a bit of a problem with the Synthfest not talking to the iPad because it's fantastic technology. As soon as I got that sorted, we'll crack on. But in the meantime, look at this fantastic toy.
He means me, not
Right, sorry for the delay again. A couple of quick notices. Toilets are the other side of that wall. If you go back out into the corridor, turn left, toilets are down there. If there's a fire, you'll hear an alarm and you'll watch me run out the back. There is an emergency exit at the back, there's one on the left, and apparently this screen will magically disappear and there's a fire exit behind that as well.
and if you could all grab a piece of this and just take it with you. Just
Take that with you.
but bring it back.
This talk is in two parts. The first part is Rob here talking about the Fairlight, and then in the second half we'll get Steve Levine down here to come up and take part. There'll be question and answers at the end. We've got roving microphones so everybody can hear questions, so if you stick a hand up, someone will come to you with a mic, and then we'll hear what you're doing. Without further ado, Rob.
Thank you. Right, if I can get my... There we go. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you. This is amazing. I didn't expect to see the whole place full, so this is really exciting. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Stand on Sound for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you guys about something that's very, very dear to my heart, which is the Fairlight. And the Fairlight CMI is 40 years old this year. The first Series 1 shipped to Mr. Stevie Wonder, I believe. I've actually seen the contract and he signs it with his thumbprint. But before that, he actually started gigging with it in Madison Square Garden about 40 years ago to this day. So I just thought, I'll give some feedback. I thought I would look at the history and maybe untell a few myths, make sure that you kind of understand what really happened, the people that were really involved. And I was doing this presentation and it was getting a bit long-winded and a bit technical, and then all of a sudden I get the phone call that we're going to have Steve, so I'm going to bring Steve up about halfway through, which has saved my bacon. So without further ado, let's first have a look at just some credentials for me. So if you don't know me, my name is Rob Puricelli. I'm the guy behind failedmuso.com, a lesser-known website, not very popular, but I get some good feedback from it, and I do talk a lot about the Fairlight CMI because it's a little passion of mine. By day, I'm an instructional designer, so I train people either like this or through e-learning, so that's what I do for my day job, but in the time in between that, I like to restore and repair these on behalf of a very dear friend of mine, Mr. Peter Wilk of Horizontal Productions. Peter is based out in Sydney. He's an English guy from Islington, but he worked in the Fairlight studio in Rushcutters Bay in Sydney from the original version of the Fairlight company. So he knows these things inside out. And he was very astute back in the day when Fairlight went bust in '89. He bought up a ton of stock and has been servicing and restoring and repairing ever since. And if you want a Fairlight CMI, he is the guy to go to. I'm just his UK hands, eyes and ears, basically. So I stand on the shoulders of giants. I'm not an expert, I want to get that out there right away, but I'm a fan and I'm an enthusiast. So, anybody know who this guy is? Hands up. No, close but no cigar. Tears for Fears, but yeah.
Ian Stanley.
Ian Stanley, thank you. So, Ian Stanley is an elusive character. Trust me, I tried to track him down, and they got as far as a family member, and they just said, no, he doesn't want to interact with the world anymore. Certainly not in this world. But this is the guy that got me into Fairlights actually hands-on, because it was this machine that you see on the right that I first restored. So this had been sat in Chris Hughes's Jacobean studios that he has down in Wiltshire in one of these stone outhouses. And although it was in flight cases, it had become quite corroded, quite smelly. And we actually managed to restore it back to full working order, as you can see in the bottom picture there. And that's in my little bedroom studio at home, which my wife absolutely hates because it's full of stuff like this. So that's what really kind of got me hands-on with these machines after many, many years of just dreaming and looking at pictures on the internet, getting all moist about the gusset. So that's where I am. And of course, my start for the passion of the Fairlight was with this guy. You must remember this clip.
The screen is decided it doesn't want to work now.
Is it? We've lost the... there we go. No, we've lost it again. Oh, this is fun. It is ironic that all of the things aren't working. The 30-year-old machine behind me is absolutely fine so far. I've got no output, guys. Anyone? I'll do a dance. Maybe if you can see my laptop screen. You've all been on YouTube, I'm sure. If you're a Fairlight, you've Googled Fairlight, one of the first videos that comes up on YouTube is the wonderful Kieran Prenderville on Tomorrow's World in 1980, when he introduced CMI to us that used to sit in front of a TV on a Thursday night waiting for Top of the Pops. This comes on and I'm blown away. This thing is making sounds that sound like the actual sounds they're supposed to be making. So the problem is that when this was broadcast, he got stuff wrong. Surprise, surprise. He said these sounds are being generated entirely by the computer. There are no recordings involved. It's a sampler. Of course there are recordings. So the misinformation and the myths about the Fairlight started way back at the very, very beginning, and they've just snowballed over the years. So I do try to set those straight in the most polite way I can muster when you're discussing things on forums on the internet. So that was my first introduction to the CMI. So I just want to give you a little bit of a history about how the Fairlight came to be. Because again, there's a little bit of misinformation and a lack of information in certain cases. Forgive the puns, I get bored. All's Furs in Love and War refers to a guy called Tony Furs, and we'll come to him in just a minute. But you probably recognise these two guys, Kim Ryrie and on the right, Peter Vogel. Somebody who I actually am so honoured to actually call a friend these days. He's a brilliant, brilliant man, and when you get a phone call from him, it's like somebody getting a phone call from Bob Moog. It's just mind-blowing. So these guys set out in the early 1970s to create a synthesizer that could make natural acoustic sounds. They wanted, like every synth manufacturer back then, wanted to recreate cellos, oboes, pianos, strings, and they wanted to do it completely electronically. Everyone at the time was using subtractive analog synthesis. They thought, how about we use additive synthesis and regenerate the harmonics of a natural acoustic instrument within a computer? So they set about doing this. Lost the HDMI again. They set about doing this and failed continuously.
Did they use an iPad?
So they were trying lots of different things. Peter is a genius, but he just couldn't figure out how to make these natural acoustic sounds using additive synthesis and harmonics. Is there any chance we're going to get the image back anytime soon? I've got stuff to show. So we'll anticipate that being fixed. But there's one guy that doesn't often get mentioned. And the reason I want to mention it is because he emailed me a few years ago and very abruptly told me that he should be included in this story because he's often left out. And so, in respect to him, that's what I want to do. This guy is called Tony Furs. And Tony Furs was an employee of RCA, and he was based in Canberra in Australia. And he was working with all sorts of electronic technology, and he had the same idea as Vogel and Ryrie. He wanted to create an electronic instrument that could make natural acoustic sounds using additive synthesis. And what he came up with this is not very useful. Yeah. Oh, yay! There he is, there's Tony. And Tony is leaning against the Qasar. This is the Qasar 2. There was a Qasar 1, but there literally, I think, was only one of the Qasar ones. I always used to call it the Qasar because I'm very particular. There's no U, but apparently it is called the Qasar. Now this was an additive synthesis, and it's a weird looking thing. I often think that maybe somebody like Ross Lamont should actually create one of these with a Euro rack at the top. That would be quite nice. But it was an awful machine, and it sounded terrible. Given the audio glitches we're having, I'm not entirely sure if we're going to get any audio from this. But if you Google Lindsay Blue plays the Qasar on YouTube, you'll be treated to the most god-awful din that you've ever heard. And it's peculiar because he's playing this Qasar to a guy with a scarf and a cardigan, smoking a cigarette with lots of hair, just sat there in front of this thing like it's the most wonderful thing he's ever heard. It's awful. So it wasn't working. So because of Tony's link to RCA, he was able to get hold of microprocessors very easily. He got hold of this brand new microprocessor called the Motorola 6800. And he decided to try and use computing. He thought maybe computers can compute those complex harmonics to give us that natural sound. So he built this machine here that you see. This is Tony on the left, stood next to what is known as the Multimode 8. And it's a very large dual processor computer with absolutely no PCBs in it whatsoever. It's all wire wrapped, and I've never seen inside of one, but I've been told that it's a god-awful mess. But he was trying to use computer technology to make these things work. And as you see, the guy on the right who's doing some testing, you'll notice that he's actually using a light pen, which is something that if you're familiar with the Fairlight, you'll actually recognise that technology was already there. So Vogel and Ryrie get wind of this. They travel down to Canberra, they see Tony, they have a look at this, and they're very interested, particularly Peter Vogel, very interested in the fact they're using microprocessors. So they do a licensing agreement with Tony and say, can we license your stuff? We'll take it away and see what we can do. So the first thing they do is they have PCBs created for all the functions. So it manages to get the size of this machine down because it is a considerable beast. Those drives on the right-hand side are 8-inch drives. So they're already this tall, and then there's that much on top. But you might notice, if you are familiar with the CMI, certainly the Series 1 and Series 2s, that there is a very familiar look about this machine. Drives on the right, processor switches on the left. That's it from both sides. I must call out the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences in Sydney, who are very gracious in letting me have these images to share with you today. Well, they've got some really good stuff on there, so if you're interested, go and have a look. So the first job was to condense it down, to make it work more efficiently. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the very first CMI, the Qasar CMI, dual processor system. Now we see something that is looking very, very Fairlighty. 2 drives on the right, processor switches on the left, front panel that drops down to reveal a digital card cage with all the PCBs in. This lovely new clean design, all that metalwork designed and fabricated by a gentleman called Alan Galt, who sadly left us a couple of years ago. But he went on to build and fabricate every single Fairlight that left the factory, all 300 odd of them over the years. It was his metalwork, it was his monitor designs. He's a very important guy in this story. So that was the Qasar CMI. Unfortunately, it still didn't do what they wanted it to do. It made awful sounds that were nothing like the real things. So one day Peter Vogel thinks, I wonder if I can record the sound and play it back. So that's what he tried to do. Now, ADCs and DACs were not readily available off the shelf back in the late 70s, so he had to build his own analog to digital converters and digital to analog converters, but he did so. He hooked it up to the memory and was able to record a sound and store it as ones and zeros in the RAM. Then he had to figure out how are we going to pitch this up and down so we can actually play a chromatic scale on this thing. So he came up with the concept of adjusting the clock speed. Faster clock speed, higher pitch, lower clock speed, lower pitch. But you start drifting 2 or 3 semitones either side of the root note, and you start to get noise, artifacts, aliasing as they call it. So again, Peter had to come up with an idea, how do we get rid of this? So analog filters, we can use those to put the sound through and then just roll off, so we just get rid of those frequencies. But of course those frequencies change on every note you play. So the system has to be able to calculate not only the clock speed based on the note you've pressed on the keyboard, but the amount of filtering that needs to be applied to that particular sound based on its pitch. So there's a lot going on in here, and this is obviously very early days. You know, we don't necessarily have to worry about any of that at all in modern day sampling. So he did it, and it was successful. It sounded rough, but it was there. And the dog sample, which is the very famous first sample, sounded like the dog. The piano sample sounded like the piano. So he was on to a winner. And so they pressed ahead, they recruited more people, they set up the business properly, and they started producing and taking the Fairlight out on the road. The first thing that happened is a completely fortuitous event. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Elvis's music director was called Bruce Jackson, I believe, and Bruce was an Australian. Bruce's mum lived next door to Kim Ryrie. Bruce comes home in 77, 78 after Elvis has left us and says, I've got nothing to do, and his mum says, oh, there's these 2 guys next door that are working on some kind of instrument, maybe you should go and see them. So off he pops and goes to see Kim and Peter, and he's blown away because he has a huge amount of contacts in the music industry in America. So they get the Fairlight, pack it up, take it to LA, they show it to Stevie Wonder. In the room at the time is Larry Fast, who you probably know for his work with Peter Gabriel, amongst others. Larry gets on the phone to Peter Gabriel, says, you've got to hear this, and so this chain of events happens, and we get the Fairlight actually out in the open. Of course, in the UK, Psycho Systems was run by Peter Gabriel and Steve Hayne, again, sadly no longer with us. And that's where the whole thing took off. And then we start to see the Qasar looking a bit more Fairlighty. You can see the card cage there, the monitor, that wonderful hospital beige. That's the actual name of the paint. We have cans of it. They still make it. And light pens, and of course, in 1979, we have the Series 1, although it's just called the Fairlight CMI. And you can spot the Fairlight Series 1 if you look on the front of the mainframe. There's a rotary knob. It's a terminal baud rate adjuster, so it goes from 0 to 9600 or something. It does nothing, but they just left it there because it was. And you'll find that with Fairlights. There are elements of the Fairlight that just don't do anything. They just remove it, like the additive synthesis. So this just changed the world in terms of sampling. A couple of years later, 2 or 3 years later, we have the Series 2, and then a year after that, the 2X. Does anybody know the difference between the 2 and the 2X? Sorry? The X, yeah, good, nice, thank you. 4 letters, MIDI, thank you very much. MIDI was the big difference, and they implemented it. In fact, the way that the Fairlight keyboard communicated with the CPU was pretty much 99% of what the standard MIDI specification was. They just didn't know it at the time. And when the big 5, I think it was, sat down, it was a pretty easy job to fit MIDI as a standard to this. 1985, we see the Series 3. Now that's what we see here, albeit in a slightly different form. This is the Rackman version that was produced much later in the range, towards 89 and beyond for a few years. The Series 3 gave us 16-bit. It was much more powerful. It had a whopping 114 megabyte Winchester hard drive, which is more than enough for these machines. Still had a floppy disk drive, also had a tape drive for backup, and this was the one, the fabled one, that could potentially cost you up to £100,000, but mostly over 20 to 50. Peanuts. They did away with the light pen on the Series 3 and they replaced it with the graphics tablet, which is equally bad, and I never use it. But they actually, in 1985, Fairlight introduced for the first time pitch bend and mod wheels. Before that it was just unfixed sliders that you could assign to pitch bend if you wanted to, but there was no way of accurately getting it back. So for the first time in 85, Fairlight went with the crowd and went with a pitch bend and mod wheel. So, a bit of a timeline. 75, the M8 CMI, 79, the Series 1, 82, the Series 2, 83, the 2X, 85, the Series 3. And then we come on to the last years of the actual original Fairlight company. Between 89 and around 93, they carried on producing systems much like this because that was the market. It was post-production studios and they wanted things they could just shove in racks. So the first MFX was a Series 3 CMI plus hard disk recording. 1989, 24-track digital hard disk recording at 16-bit. Pretty impressive stuff. They enhanced it. After 89, Fairlight went bust. They started up another company called Fairlight ESP, Electric Sound Picture. And that ran for 2 or 3 more years before that went belly up and got bought out by the company that ran it until a few years ago. And then the next incarnation of the CMI was the fabled 30A, of which 14 exist. I've only ever seen one. And it was Peter Vogel's little attempt at trying to create something new. It did 32-bit floating point. It had a goodness switch, so you could go from 8-bit to 32-bit on anything you used. Fully compatible with all the old libraries. But still cost a princely £16,000. Again, all hand-built by Alan Gold. Unfortunately, due to some legal wranglings, which I won't go into here, only 14 of the 100 planned were ever made. They do exchange hands every now and again on places like Vimeo and on eBay, in fact, for some considerable sums of money. Here's another example of misinformation. Have we got anybody here from Electronic Sound magazine? Good. Right. First of all, Electronic Sound magazine, it's a very good magazine. Other magazines are available, considering our hosts. But they ran a piece a few months ago on the Fairlight. And I opened up the page, eagerly opened up the page, because Peter had said, I've done this interview with these guys, and they're only down the road from me in Norwich. And I opened it up to be presented with this as a representative picture of the Fairlight CMI. So any of you that use Arturia plugins should recognise that is their virtual recreation image. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got 3 times the amount of buttons and sliders. We've got this mythical fader attachment. And we've also got an SD card drive on the mainframe unit itself, which we do use, and they're very good. But what this does, and I actually emailed the editor, and we had a bit of an exchange, and he hasn't contacted me again since. I was very polite, I promise. But this doesn't help the cause of history. And I'm very particular about this. I know that in a year or two's time, somebody's going to come to me and say, I want a Fairlight CMI, and we're going to provide them with one, and they're going to go, where's that mixer board? It's only got 2 buttons, because that is what happens. So this is why I do stuff like this, because I want to set the record straight. So we'll forgive them that.